Our presenter today is Lance Bettencourt, a partner at the firm and a leading services expert. Lance has published widely on the topics of service and innovation, including his book entitled Service Innovation, published by McGraw-Hill in 2010. He is also Business Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, California Business Review, and Business Horizons, to name several of his publications. Lance, the webinar is all yours.
Well, thanks, Rob, and thanks to everyone for joining us for the webinar today on revolutionary service, winning the war on service mediocrity. Let's start off with a basic question. Why should you care about enhancing the service experience? Perhaps for some of you this is going to be self-explanatory or an obvious answer. Of course you should care. But for others, I want to begin with this basic business question, if you will. What does it take to achieve above average growth and profitability? Certainly we know that exceptional products are important. Certainly low-cost operations transferred along in terms of a decent value or low price to the customer is important. But increasingly we find that close customer relationships, excellence, are critical to business growth and profitability. Let's take a look at that further. Here's a research study published, as you can see in the source note, in the Journal of Marketing in 2008. The question is, based on this research study, who has above average long-term stock market performance? The winner, if you will, in this dark blue line here, well above average for the S&P 500, are companies with high initial customer satisfaction at the beginning of this 10-year time period, and it was increasing customer satisfaction over time. So high and increasing, well above average stock market performance. The runner-up, if you will, are companies with low initial customer satisfaction, but increasing customer satisfaction over time. If you follow this through to the green there and that light blue, these companies then are high customer satisfaction, but decreasing over time, and the low blue, or the blue one there being and even decreasing over time. The point being, does an investment in customer satisfaction pay off? The answer is an unequivocal yes. In general, we know from research and other sources that improved service experiences lead to customer satisfaction, which leads to, as you can see here, various happy results for companies. Things such as higher retention rates, greater share of wallet for customers, greater willingness to pay. So for example, in another experiment that was published, again, in Journal of Marketing, you can see here, students were presented various favorable and unfavorable scenarios in a restaurant experience. You know, good and bad food quality, good and bad ambiance, and favorable and unfavorable customer service. They were then asked to rate their overall satisfaction with the experience and to indicate what they would be willing to pay for the restaurant visit. The relationship you can see here between customer satisfaction and overall willingness to pay really says a lot. It's not only an increasing positive relationship, but it's an S-shaped curve. As customer satisfaction gets higher and higher, it has an increasing positive effect on willingness to pay. Great service experiences absolutely pay off. Of course, some firms are clearly doing well in this regard, and many others struggle. Over the past 2 decades, average customer satisfaction, as tracked by the Customer Satisfaction Index, has gone from 74.8 all the way up to, well, 75.8 in 2012. Yes, this is a challenging endeavor. If customer satisfaction wasn't already difficult enough to deal with, services have extra baggage. They're intangible qualities, very difficult to control because people are part of the process. And experience makes them part recipient, part producer of the service, and ultimately part product for some service experiences. The service challenge, if you will, is summarized well by Henry Chesbrough. He says, without tangible products to prototype and focus on, how can we determine whether we're designing or delivering upon what customers want? In a parallel manner, we might ask, how can we know what it takes to create revolutionary service experiences? You know, how do we shape it? How do we deliver upon that because of that intangible nature of services? Well, at its heart, a revolutionary service experience is one that delivers unique and meaningful value to customers in comparison to competitive services. So we might use this lens or roadmap of strategy to help us understand what revolutionary service looks like. At its essence, strategy is about creating that differentiated value and then ultimately sustaining that advantage over time. So if we apply that lens to revolutionary service, we realize that we need to be able to envision a unique and valuable service position, one that's very different from what's out there today. We need to be able to create that unique and valuable service experience, again, one that delivers in a very unique way compared to the models in existence today. And ultimately, we need to be able to sustain that service advantage that we've created and envisioned over time. These three areas, if you will, provide the focus for the remainder of today's webinar. In each area, we need to think and act differently in order to achieve very different results. So first, we need to have a unique focus to envision revolutionary service positions. Second, in order to create those unique experiences, we need a unique service model. And third, to sustain that advantage over time, we need a distinctive set of capabilities to sustain our position over time. So let's start with the unique focus of revolutionary service. Focus has to do with where you look to find opportunities. If you have a very constrained focus, you come away with a constrained or limited sense of what's possible. You limit the novelty of the insights you come away with. We need a distinctive focus to gain unique insights, ultimately based upon what customers need from the service experience. The conventional focus, however, is upon how things are done today, and that actually undermines our ability to come away with that distinctive insight we require. This is true whether the focus is on the current service journey, the mapping of the current customer experience, what it looks like today. It's true if our focus is on the quality of our current service offering, a focus on evaluations of how we're doing today in terms of the services we provide. And it's true if our focus is on what the competition offers, that is, how our how our competitors doing things today. So for example, with a focus on how we do things today, service quality, we ask questions like, how is the quality of our service? And we get customers to assess us on characteristics such as the knowledge of our employee base, or the ease of using our website, the convenience of the hours of operation, or even the flexibility of our policies. In each case, though, in terms of the service quality here, we're evaluating the quality of what's out there today, the attributes of our current service. It's like we're asking customers, how are we doing, when we should be asking the customer, how are you doing? It's a 180-degree shift in perspective that gets us beyond service quality, because service quality is on customer needs. Though it has its place, too much focus on today's service experience, how things are done today, keeps us from moving forward. It anchors us in the past. Revolutionary service requires a forward-looking perspective. Consider what happens when we ask customers to rate something like how convenient the hours of operation are. They say, it's very important to me, I'm not really happy with how it is today. What are your options as an executive at that point in time? You can either improve the hours of operation, or improve the hours of operation. A focus on how things are done today is constraining to revolutionary service. To get beyond mediocre service performance, our enemy is how things are done today. We require a new focus, not how things are done, but rather what needs to be done to deliver customer value. This is the challenge that we've seen time and time. How can I as a company get beyond the services we offer today to envision the service experience of tomorrow, in particular based on customer needs? In short, the answer is we must shift our focus to what the customer wants to accomplish, regardless of how things are done today. In 1968, at the Mexico City Games, Dick Fosbury won the Olympic gold medal and set a new Olympic record with a high jump of 7 feet 4 1/4 inches. But if you know the story, you know that it's how he did it that ultimately revolutionized the sport. He used a then unorthodox head-first, back-to-the-bar method of high jumping that's now known as the Fosbury flop. Fosbury's focus was first and foremost on what needed to be accomplished, not improving the style of the day. That's the same type of shift in perspective that we need in leading revolutionary service initiatives. This experience, here's the contrast between how and what thinking. A how focus looks at how things are done today in order to improve the current service process. So if you think about something like making flight arrangements today, how it's done is, well, I need to input my search criteria. I need to sort against those criteria, provide my credit card information, perhaps check the website to confirm the flight status, print my boarding pass, wait in a security line, etc. But there's a purpose behind each of these things that's done today. And that purpose for why we input search criteria, why we sort, why we provide the credit card information, if you will, is what customers are trying to accomplish. That what focus is independent of how it's done today. It gives us a more stable perspective of customer needs, and it helps us ultimately to envision very new ways of delivering value rather than simply trying to tweak and improve pain points with how it's done today. Ultimately, a what focus versus a how focus. Who does service work? How service work is done? What technology is used? And even when and where service is provided. It helps us to place technology, processes, and even employees in services in their proper place as means to an end. So here's a handful of what needs, if you will, that are independent of how, that an insurance customer wants to accomplish as part of obtaining auto insurance and its benefits. For decades now, Progressive Insurance, my example here, has challenged how insurance and its benefits are obtained while better helping customers get these specific needs done. So for example, they created side-by-side rate comparisons to help customers to more quickly determine which provider has the lowest rates. More recently, they've introduced Name Your Price. Tell them how much you want to pay, and they'll tell you what the policy would look like to help you get the needed coverage at the lowest price possible. Nearly 2 decades ago now, they introduced immediate response vehicles that bring the Progressive agent, the claims agent, to you and possibly even to the scene of the accident to help you, among other things, to avoid feeling anxious following an accident. More recently, in the 2004 range, they introduced concierge-level service. You drop the car off with them, and they take care of the rest. So it helps the customer to get the car repaired with minimal effort. And finally, a very simple example here, they've introduced 24/7 live support to help me to quickly get a hold of a live person in the company anytime I need it. For revolutionary service, this is the shift in focus we need. This is the question we should be asking. What must the customer accomplish to successfully obtain service? What do they need to accomplish? What criteria do they use to judge and evaluate success in that process? This question gets us beyond how things are done today. Revolutionary service comes from a focus on helping customers to obtain service more effectively, reliably, conveniently, or even affordably than they can today based on how it's done today. Here's some good news. A what focus, as I mentioned before, is more stable over time. How things are done change all the time. Because of this, there's also a fairly universal map of what customers are trying to accomplish when obtaining service. Regardless of the service, customers need to access the service in some form. It could be online, it could be in person, any other form. It could be via self-service technology. They need to define or share and communicate their service needs, regardless of the type of service they're obtaining. Selecting among service options, finalizing the plan with the provider. They need to receive the service ultimately, perform their role, monitor progress and results over time, etc. In my book, Service Innovation, I provide more. The point here is not to go through a detailed list of the steps, but to say, look, you can get a solution or service independent perspective on what customers are trying to accomplish. It is stable over time, and at each of these steps along the way, it helps you to probe deeper into what criteria and needs customers have to evaluate success along the way. At Service 360 Partners, we've also done the next step to create an inventory of what criteria customers use to judge success at each of these steps along the way. So here's what obtaining service looks like from a what perspective for making flight arrangements. So these steps that I showed you before. At every step along the way, we can go talk to customers and figure out what are their pain points, their delays, the criteria that they use to evaluate success at each of these steps. In total, there may be 60 to 80 different customer needs. For example, at the one step, locate flight options, here's a what that customers are trying to accomplish, specific needs that they have that are independent of how service is delivered today. They want to quickly find flights that meet their needs and preferences. They want to review only flight options that fit their needs and preferences. They want to ensure that no flights are overlooked that better fit their preferences. And they might want to figure out if there's a lower price flight available with a change in dates or cities or locations, etc. The goal as a company is to create and deliver the service experience that satisfies what customers are trying to accomplish in a better way. At the end of the day, customers don't want your service experience. They want what your service experience helps them to accomplish. In parallel to our customer focus, it's also important to focus on what versus how when it comes to the company or employee perspective on providing service. At a fundamental level, providing service entails such steps as receiving customers. To parallel the act, it requires defining customer needs. Now, this might be by talking to the customer. It might be via online inputs the customer provides. It might be by taking an order, doing a questionnaire with the customer, like in financial advising, etc. But at a fundamental level, I need to understand and define your needs as a customer. I need to develop a plan. How am I going to satisfy those? Verify the plan with you, behind the scenes, etc. I need to deliver service to the customers, again, etc., etc. Perspective takes you outside of how things are done today. And at every step along the way for providing service, just like obtaining service, it helps us to probe deeper to find those undesirable costs, inconveniences, problems, and suboptimal results in providing service that can help us to know how to create revolutionary service models for providing or obtaining service. The guiding question for bringing all this together is to say that revolutionary service begins by answering this question. What are customers trying to accomplish that competitors ultimately are unwilling or unable to satisfy as well as your company? What do we need to do to get there? Well, we need to map out what the customer needs are independent of how things are done today, and ultimately to do that on the provider side as well. We need to prioritize these specific needs that customers are trying to accomplish independent of how things are done today. We need to look at, from an analysis standpoint, also to see if there are some segments of customers that share priorities. So we might have separate services or separate service models that appeal to each, ultimately then targeting specific needs for improvement. So to this point, we have a distinctive focus on what customers are trying to accomplish. Now let's look at what it takes to create a revolutionary service model based on these. When it comes to creating innovative service models, we have met the enemy, and he is us. Revolutionary service requires doing things differently, and unfortunately, there's a couple of built-in biases within organizations that work against being different in that way, especially meaningfully different. It really begins with this built-in question, this default question that we have once we've determined what customers want. We ask, how can our service be better? In other words, how can we do more and add more to the customer experience? We ask this question because we inherently have this bias towards more is better with regard to services. And we struggle ultimately with the desire to be all things to all people, to serve everyone and to serve all their needs. And what happens when we have this more is better, serve everyone bias built in is that over time we add costs and we add complexity to our service model. And ultimately, that increases the vulnerability of our service to more focused services. If you will, at the top end of the scale here in complexity and cost is where the general hospital lies. It's ultimately very vulnerable then to surgical centers and to specialty clinics like Minute Clinic, who've come in with more focused operations. This is the plight of the department store, vulnerable to discount stores such as Walmart, e-retailers such as Amazon. This would also be the plight, if you will, of the traditional university. In service, more is not always better. So here's one of the primary biases leading to that more is better thinking. We have a bias against being inferior in service on any service dimension. This is especially true when it comes to assessing the potential for good enough or disruptive services, such as Minute Clinic, online education, or, if you will, Redbox when it comes to movie rental. That customers may not want inferiority. Some customers do and will value it when it comes with other benefits, such as those lower costs or greater convenience in the service experience. The enemy's cousin similarly reinforces the idea of more of the same. It has us saying, you know, that's just silly. It'll never work in our industry to do it that way, until, of course, it does, typically by some outside player who is willing to think differently. In combination, these two enemies have us actively resisting being different, the very thing that revolutionary service requires. To be different, we need to break free from industry convention. In keeping with that, this question borrows from the authors of Blue Ocean Strategy. How can we create a service model that ultimately makes the competition irrelevant? In other words, it funds value in our industry. Two answers to this. The first is, in short, gaining strategic advantage requires intentionally being worse in some things. We need to embrace weakness. Revolutionary service requires embracing weaknesses at some things in order to deliver excellence in ultimately what matters most to customers. So a fundamental question we should ask once we understand what customers want is, where should we be worse in order to be better in what matters most? Where would our target customers actually value trade-offs in the service experience? In the absence of asking that question, most companies find themselves with average performance across the board, the blue curve, if you will, in this diagram, looking much like the other competitors in their industry. But if we presume for the moment that customer needs on the left are more important than those on the right, then we really want to look like got some things that are above average performance and some things perhaps that are actually below average performance. To get there, we can really just follow a simple questioning process to lay out where more is needed and where less is needed. Now, companies tend to be very good, as I said before, at the where is more needed perspective. So they're very good at asking questions like, which factors should we raise well above the industry average? Which factors should be created that the industry has never offered before, like that one on the far left here? But revolutionary service requires not only asking those questions based on what customers are trying to accomplish, but also these two questions. What factors should be reduced well below the industry average? And which factors that the industry has taken for granted? What things that we do that the industry takes for granted really should be eliminated because they don't offer enough value to customers to justify the inconvenience, extra cost, etc. So for example, in comparison to traditional health club, Curves is a good example of fundamentally reshaping value via service. The strengths of the traditional health club, if you will, are squarely focused on the right-hand side of this diagram. All the needed equipment you could possibly want, a fun atmosphere, amenities beyond workout equipment. You've got your juice bar, you've got the shower facilities, etc. And customization to the extreme, because you can come in there typically any time of day, work out in whatever machines you want, any sequence. You've got a wide array of options. What the founders of Curves recognized was there was a segment of customers, women in particular, who had very different value priorities, very different in terms of what they were trying to accomplish. They were more interested in this non-threatening or comfortable workout environment and getting their workouts done in a more timely manner. And they struggled with motivation and knowing what to do. That's that guidance dimension, perhaps price and more convenient access to the service facility. So along comes Curves and creates a women's-only gym located in neighborhood shopping centers. That's that access convenience part. They offer a circuit of strength and cardiovascular equipment that women go through, from point A around the circle all the way to Z in one set order. So they get their workouts done in 3 30-minute sessions during the week. So it's very quick. There's often a coach there to guide them. Of course, the circuit itself helps guide them through the process. So it's a very different model compared to the traditional health club, very different set of value priorities. In addition to embracing weakness, revolutionary service requires being systematically unconventional in how you do things, intentionally choosing to be different in the interest of better satisfying customer needs. With those customer what's in mind, that prioritized set of what customers are trying to accomplish, we should ask this question. Is there something about how things are done today in our company, our industry, etc., that's actually part of the problem? This question recognizes that conventional practice in an industry or in a company is actually often a key reason why customer needs are unmet. We do it this way, and that leads to customer problems. It's also helpful to systematically think through a series of service design choices. So we might systematically think through, hey, should we design a service such that we're doing something for the customer, or where we're only providing them a service that enables them to do it for themselves? Should we offer every customer a very custom experience, our offerings, our processes, treatment, etc., or no, everything both to the customer behind the scenes is very standardized? Should we offer a full menu of options, a limited or narrow menu? Offer everything only as a bundle? You have to buy it bundled, or everything can be sold a la carte, unbundled, or, again, somewhere in between? Should all customers be treated equally? Should we be willing to treat some customers different from others, etc.? In my book, again, I go through a more complete list of these choices. The point at this point in the webinar, though, is just to say that across these dimensions and choices that companies make across these dimensions can lead to very different, very unconventional, and ultimately revolutionary service models. It's valuable to systematically consider the choices that are before you with customer needs and with your strategy in mind. So, for example, Shouldice Hospital, located in Canada, is the global leader in hernia repair, and they differentiate themselves on several of these service model design choices. For example, they have the general hospital. They only do hernia repairs. In fact, they only do one type of hernia repair. They are very selective in terms of their patient mix. They really only accept otherwise healthy patients. So not all customers can come to them like the general hospital. This, of course, keeps their costs down because it allows them to reduce the number of emergencies and certain types of equipment they need, etc. They have a very standardized process in terms of how they engage the customer, but even the surgeons follow a standardized surgical technique. It's the Shouldice way of doing a hernia repair. Very uncommon in the medical field to put those sorts of constraints on a surgeon, if you will. Very batch-oriented delivery process. The customers or the patients go through a group orientation, and then they participate in a group dinner where the patients that went through surgery, that patients who will have surgery the next day, in order to really orient them about what to expect. And that leads to this production dimension. Customers, the patients, are part of helping Shouldice to orient incoming patients and taking it really to a new level. The Shouldice patient is responsible for getting themselves up off the surgery table and walking to their room. And this, of course, promotes healing. And to further encourage walking around, there's no telephones or TVs in patient rooms, very low on the comfort dimension. Very systematically different on these design choices leads to a very revolutionary service model. Once you know what your customers need, it's time to systematically consider what changes are needed to meaningfully differentiate your service in a way that matters to customers. In practice, you want to know where is more needed, where is less needed, in terms of changing our service model, what's willing to make. In practice, this means you need to lay out the new value model for what it should look like based on what customers are trying to accomplish, what their priorities are. You need to be willing to make those trade-offs, systematically consider your options in terms of design, especially those unconventional approaches, and then ultimately conceiving of specific creative ideas to implement that specific value model. So if you do nothing else, you need to be able to ultimately envision service opportunities beyond how things are done today, and then you need to be willing to be different and even unconventional based on that understanding of what customers are trying to accomplish. So if you've gotten to this point, you've got a unique focus and a unique service model, you're certainly doing well. The final challenge lies in sustaining service excellence over time. Achieving this requires distinctive service capabilities. So let's briefly look at what it looks like in practice. As the authors of Uncommon Service conclude, for a service system to work, to be profitable, sustainable, scalable, service excellence must be normalized. It must be the normal thing that happens in the business. And this needs to be done across people, across place, across time. Of course, this can be challenging to do given the nature of services. One enemy that companies face in being able to accomplish this is relying too much on individual effort. With dedicated enough employees like Joe, service excellence can be delivered for a while with system deficiencies, but a strategy of service excellence that's ultimately based on individual effort is doomed to failure. When service excellence requires heroic effort from guys like Joe, there's a problem with it. The job of company leaders is to create service capabilities that enable everyone to excel at service on a consistent basis. The authors of Uncommon Service provide an interesting illustration of what happens when this is not the case. There's a problem at a telecom they share. It has call center systems that take 13 months for the average employee to become proficient. Meanwhile, the average employee tenure is a mere 9 months. Clearly, there is a service excellence gap here, but this is not an employee failure. This is a system capability failure. The real challenge in sustaining service excellence is to make it part of your organizational DNA so that excellence is normalized across people, time, place, etc. And even as people change, including your leaders, that it can be sustained. We use excellence for the average Joe and every new Joe that comes along. What does it require to be able to do that? Good news and bad news on that front. The bad news, it requires systematic attention to some very challenging things. Structures, systems, processes, and practices all need to be aligned with an understanding of service excellence driven by the customer's perspective of what they're trying to accomplish. The good news, though, is that competitive positions built on such interlinked capabilities are very difficult for rivals to copy. In practice, this means building capabilities focused on service excellence in 4 areas. First, orientation capabilities. That is, capabilities based on the priority the company places on achieving customer satisfaction through service excellence as reflected in its values, its decision, whatever it does to create shared beliefs throughout the organization of the priority placed on service and customer satisfaction. Secondly, design-based capabilities. That is the design and alignment of structures, processes, and systems to enable service excellence on a day-in, day-out basis creates capabilities to sustain service excellence over time. Third, delivery capabilities. That is, again, capabilities built upon employee and customer management practices that enable service excellence across people, across locations, and across time periods of delivery. And finally, there are coordination capabilities, the availability of systems and information to ensure consistency and coordination across all service interactions in which the company is engaged. These 4 capabilities and building these capabilities that ultimately allow a company to sustain its service excellence over time. And across these 4 areas, we've identified more than 60 distinct capabilities that the company needs to actively manage. So it begins with what you value. Revolutionary service companies not only ensure that they are in tune with customer needs, but they also make sure that it's that shared belief that is acted upon at all levels within the organization. and they willingly forgo that more is better approach to focus on specific customer segments and specific customer needs. Online retailer Zappos is clearly a company, if you know their story, that values the customer. Their number one value is to deliver wow through service. And this value permeates their decision-making, and that's critical. Flouting the industry standard, Zappos provides top of every Zappos webpage. They run their warehouse 24/7 despite the inefficiency of this approach, and they make every new employee, lawyers, accountants, top management executives, etc., go through the same 4-week training process on service and company vision. That's orientation capabilities put into practice. Values are good, but design puts them into practice on a day-in, day-out basis. Revolutionary service companies align their structures, processes, and systems with customer needs. This ensures that customers have a seamless experience across different people and across different parts of the organization, and it ensures accountability for the customer experience, both at high levels and low levels in the organization. It makes sure that the resources are available to deliver service excellence. It provides the flexibility and efficiency to deliver against customer needs day in, day out. Like Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic is regularly recognized for its innovation and service excellence. Its design reinforces its patients first mantra. For example, all doctors are full-time and salaried, allowing them to focus on the patient experience versus productivity concerns. Patients are cared for by care teams headed by a nurse, ensuring that patients are seen more often and ensuring that there's that accountability I mentioned for patient care. And for diseases such as diabetes that require multiple specialists and interactions with multiple specialists over time, they've put in place specialty centers under one roof that allow the patient to have that seamless experience across these different specialists. System and process design based on those values is wonderful, but service relies on people, and revolutionary service relies on management practices that ensure excellence. Revolutionary service companies rely on a combination of reward systems, hiring practices, recruiting and selection, training, etc., to ensure that their employees and their customers know what's expected of them, are motivated to do it, and have the skills and abilities to excel on a day-in, day-out basis. So I like the example of Publix in this regard. There's a lot of good examples here, but I like Publix because it is a supermarket chain. But it's a supermarket chain that has had the highest customer satisfaction for the last 18 years and running. At Publix, aligning, motivating, and enabling employees for service excellence is at the heart of their philosophy and practice. Among other things, associates are taught from day one that customers are their most valued assets to be welcomed, cherished, and appreciated within the company. They're taught the 10-foot and the 10-second rule. Acknowledge a customer anytime they're within 10 feet of you, and do so within 10 seconds. Recognition for delightful service is a part of this. They give out delightful service awards for customer service that's over and above the minimum service standards. And during Appreciation Week, executives at the company make it a point to personally see and thank every associate within the company. Not surprisingly, they are consistently listed among the 100 best companies to work for by Fortune magazine. And finally, coordination capabilities. Revolutionary service requires mechanisms to control and coordinate the many moving parts of a service system. Revolutionary service companies rely on customer-centric feedback to assess and improve service at all organizational levels, and they ensure that the information is gathered and shared and available throughout the organization to deliver superior service day in, day out. Charles Schwab, for example, is the internet brokerage firm in the United States. They provide daily customer feedback to each branch so that each individual employee knows how they're performing and where improvement is needed. Responses from surveys sent to clients the prior day are used to identify unfavorable service patterns, follow up with specific customers on issues, gather employee suggestions for improvement, and even to counsel individual employees on performance. Information is where it needs to be. Distinctive focus and service models certainly matter, But long-term success depends on answering this question. What capabilities, activities, and resources must be put in place to deliver against priority customer needs, day in, day out? So just like the customer perspective, we now need an internal perspective of what service capabilities matter to prioritize those service capabilities, to figure out where we're strong and weak, to target specific capabilities for improvement, deficiencies in our structure and systems over time, even being unconventional. If you do nothing else, you need to consider where your capabilities are lacking in making service excellence the norm. Revolutionary service requires a unique focus, model, and capabilities. We need a focus on what customers are trying to accomplish, independent of how it's done today. We need a model that makes unconventional choices to align what you do with what customers want, and we need capabilities that make service excellence the norm. So with that, Rob, I'm going to turn it back over to you to take our remaining 15 minutes to see what questions we can talk through.
Great. Thanks so much, Lance. And we appreciate those thought-provoking insights. We'll finish up with a few questions. Before we do, though, I'd like to just reiterate something Lance talked about. Building sustainable differentiation can only be achieved if an organization service capabilities embedded throughout the organization, just as Lance described. We believe organizational service capabilities, these service capabilities are a critical, important topic, and we therefore want to do our next piece of original research in this area, specifically look into how well equipped today's organizations are for really getting a sustainable service excellence model within their business. So as attendees in today's webinar, we're going to invite you and your organization to participate and benefit from this research if you're interested. So we'll provide you an update within the next few weeks on this research and an invitation to participate. And of course, all responses will be anonymous and confidential, but you'll get some output on the report and show where your organization is compared to the greater body of the sample that we do. So look forward to that. Okay, now our questions. How does this apply to companies that are predominantly product companies, Lance?
Okay. Well, obviously a lot of product companies have services that they offer. Now, this could be value-added, sort of really independent services, or they could have services in support of their product offerings, maintenance services, repair services, even the selection process, replenishment processes or services, things along those lines. And so in that case, of course, you still have that orientation to say, well, what is it that the customer is trying to accomplish? And again, thinking perhaps very unconventionally about those, especially if the customer is paying for those services. Then, of course, you have an opportunity to be very unconventional, even to have a premium priced maintenance offering, repair offering, things along those lines. So in that case, it certainly very much applies. It's possible that someone's also thinking along the lines of, we don't offer specific services, but a lot of products, there is, if you will, in a channel, a customer relationship, which is service-based, but it's not per se a service that we offer. They just sort of, we engage them in a key account situation over time. In that case, what they're trying to accomplish certainly still holds, although it may not hold in terms of that map I showed. But you still could certainly say, what is it that they value from us, or what are the features they value of our relationship, and what is it that helps them to better get done? And so in that way, it still is independent of how things are done today. And so it still has that value, even though it's not per se on the map that I showed. But the second portion of thinking in very unconventional ways based on what customers are trying to accomplish and ultimately building on capabilities for service are actually really the same. So you might have a slightly different starting point, but that second and third portions I talk about actually flow exactly the same.
Okay, thank you. Here's one. People in my company will look at me like I am crazy if I suggest we provide poor service in certain areas. How can we be certain we are picking the right service elements to focus on? Which ones should we cede to our competition?
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, that would make sense. Well, first of all, what was it? Something like I'd be crazy or what have you if I said be weak in service. Well, first of all, I'm not saying weak in the sense of service like, hey, we should suddenly just be rude to customers, and we should advocate a policy of being rude to them. And there's certain things that you just have to do, and that are expected regardless of your overall service model. But I was more speaking, not so much speaking about the interpersonal elements of service there, more about the service model, that if you will, sort of go-to-market view to the customer based on those design choices that we make. Are we going to have a full menu or a limited menu of options? Are we going to be located close to the customer or far away from the customer? And at some level, you're either going to make that choice, or you're going to be in a situation where you've got very high cost and complexity. And so, which then has to be passed along via higher price. And it's a very rare service enterprise that can do that and say, look, we're going to charge 20, 30, 40% more than the industry average to justify all these extra complexity and elements and conveniences and things like that. So part of the justification, of course, is knowing what customers value in terms of their priorities. And so that's big. And it might be by a specific segment of the market, not for the market as a whole. But it's not only what customers value. It, of course, also has to be brought internally to also say, what is our strategy? What do we want to be known for? And what can we afford as well in terms of even what we can charge for, make up for via other means of revenue, or pass along to customers by way of a higher price. And so it's what customer priorities are in combination with those internal considerations.
All right. We've got one more question here. The concept of service capability seems pretty important to a company's long-term success. What would be your recommendation for how a company could get a handle on where it stands today?
Well, I think the key thing, and I didn't say this during the webinar itself, but I may take a backtrack just here for a moment before answering that, is it's important to recognize the distinction. When I say capabilities, I mentioned a lot of best practices of what Zappos does and what Cleveland Clinic does and things like that. Capabilities are different, however, from best practices. It's tempting to go out there and simply say, look, this is what other companies are doing. Capability. I'll give you a little example here. Service guarantees are very popular in a lot of different companies. If something goes wrong, we give you $5 off, we give you all your money back, or whatever it is. Well, a guarantee is a best practice, and it's a very good best practice, but it's not a capability per se, because you don't have to have it. When I think about capabilities, I'm thinking about what we internally need to accomplish in order to deliver and sustain service excellence over time. So, for example, a guarantee, among other things, helps us to build the capability of where customers are willing to complain to us. We will know when there is a problem. We'll be able to get that information. It's kind of in that coordination capability realm. So first and foremost, you've got to be able to separate best practice, or how things are done today, versus what we really need to accomplish internally, which is that capability. So you need to get your mind wrapped around that. And so at Service 360 Partners, we've gone back through literally 2-3 decades of academic research, in addition to doing our own research on the topic, to say what really are the capabilities in those 4 areas, the orientation, design, delivery, and coordination. And in each of those areas, we've got about 15 plus or minus distinct capabilities that are independent of the solution today that companies ultimately need to get their mind wrapped around, in the sense of they need to go to their internal employees, the providers, the managers on the front line, to say, how are we doing? What's really important to us having success? Where are we strong? Where are we weak from your perspective, in order to identify those deficiencies, and then to take it inside to say, what practices should we put in place? What are the best practices of other parallel service industries, et cetera, to do that? So again, separating out the what versus how here is very, very important, measuring it before then taking to that next step of saying, put in place to improve upon this efficiency.
Yeah. Listen, 2 more questions came in. Let's see if we can go ahead and get those answered as well. How will this approach help me compete with good enough competitors if I'm positioned as the premium provider?
That's a very good question. Well, first of all, this certainly applies to the good enough. I kind of mentioned that as one possibility. And certainly when you've got those trade-offs of very high, very low, of course, that often leads to those good enough services. I think every company, though, needs to think through that to say, look, if I'm going to charge more, what are the things that my target customers are really willing to pay more for? I showed that research right up front that if you offer better service, then customers are willing to pay more. Okay, but that's a basic. But what does better service mean? A premium service provider has to get their mind wrapped around what are the key priorities that customers really say are important to them. Our target customers on that premium, those where they go, look, this is really important, and this is something that good enough lower-end provider doesn't do. That's really then a point of differentiation, and it really answers that question of what are customers trying to accomplish that competitors, in this case the good enough competitors, are unwilling or unable to satisfy. So I think it's still in that what focus with a specific segment in mind, but it's about knowing what things are really important to them that the good enough won't go after, because ultimately those are the ones that we can use to improve upon to justify that premium price position.
All right. And then the next question is, it seems clear that service excellence would hope to minimize the need for service recovery, but how might your approach apply to service recovery and then be applied to overall service innovation?
Well, let's look at it both. Well, you can look at it across the board. One, you could just take service recovery as what customers are trying to accomplish. So we presume for the moment that there is a recovery scenario that they have to go through. And we could say, well, what does that scenario look like? They need to access us, if you will, to tell us about their problem or complaint. They need to explain that to us or share or define the problem. They need to have us understand it. We take action. They do their part, et cetera. So you could take the what must customers accomplish view of the service recovery experience, not just how things are done today, but what they want to get done. You could then look at unconventional ways of recovering and even the capabilities required to recover. So one thing is to look at it in that way. The other approach, of course, is, yes, we'd like to avoid recovery altogether. And so, of course, we want to figure out, well, what are the key problems that customers are experiencing that lead them to that scenario? And then, again, look at our model and our capabilities to make sure that those are in place to avoid places as well.
Great. Okay. Well, that is all our questions. We appreciate the time today. We're right at the bottom of the hour, so we'll finish up and conclude this. If you have any questions, you can certainly send them to Lance or I, or just to info@service360partners.com. Again, we'll make a copy of this presentation available to you sometime this week. Thanks so much for attending.
Thanks, everyone.